Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming to the BBL on our New Orleans service learning trip. Before I begin, there'll be two awkward things which I'll be doing, and every other speaker they'll be holding this mic only because they're being recorded. It's not that people need to feel important. The second thing is, this is where I have to be really obnoxious, is I'll have to ask you to turn off your phones, not just like put them on silent or vibrate, because apparently it interferes with the recording guy. So yeah, that's about it. So as you can see, the general theme we're going to say is we're going to keep this informal. That can also be read as we're not very well prepared, or as well prepared as we should be. Just kidding. We have a lineup of people. The way we plan to keep it is we're going to speak about our experiences, very personal. Each person has their own perspective. For the next 40 minutes, we'll kind of start off with the introduction, which Jeff is going to tell us where this all started off. Darren will then lead us into what was the whole concept of what we did there. We'll speak about some specific projects which we did, which we were excited about. And then we're kind of going to wrap it up and leave it open for question and answers. So with that, I give the mic to Jeff.
Hey y'all, thanks for coming out. I appreciate it, and I am getting the pink duckies. So as Ash said, we all sort of went down to New Orleans with some different goals in mind for each of us. There are different rationalities, whether it was from personal reasons or just an interest in to see what happened. But as it's no real secret, it all stemmed from what happened down there with Katrina, which was just a massive storm, as you can see. After the storm hit, a group of second years, namely Darren and Shara, did go down there and helped with the traditional sort of gutting of houses. That was in their spring break of their first year, and in coming back this year, we all wanted to sort of have a different impact, and that was sort of the goal, is to maybe sort of, give a man a fish, feed him for a day, help a man learn to fish, and you sort of feed him for a lifetime. And that was sort of our goal, is to really make a lasting impact. Just to sort of give you some of the ideas of what actually happened down there. In the city of New Orleans itself, over 700 people did die. The exact numbers no one will ever really know, but it was definitely well over, up to really close to 1,000 or so. The whole city, was predominantly, a lot of it was flooded. So far with Katrina, the total economic impact of the region is well over $60 billion, and that number keeps going up and up and up over time. So our goal is obviously to go down there and have a different effect. We wanted to have a positive effect down there, and really building up some economic activity through the grassroots organizations. Also, just to give you an idea of New Orleans itself, this is the city. You can see from the Mississippi River. Pre-Katrina population was about $480,000. Post-Katrina, you're looking at about 480,000 people to 250,000 people. So it's lost, roughly half the city size, and that was purely as a result of just people losing all their homes and being displaced. Once again, New Orleans is trying to recover, and we really wanted to be part of a recovery effort in that manner. So why were we there? New Orleans is a fantastic city. Anyone who's ever been there, you just become captivated by it. It's one of these few cities that really captures the imagination and is completely unique from probably any place else in the United States, and if not the world. It's been rated America's most unique cultural destination, which most people would probably agree with in many shapes and forms. It's also one of the world's don't miss destinations. Just a couple of things that really come from it, from the streetcars to the food to the French Quarter, Pat O'Brien's, where some of the people here might have visited once or twice. Everything from Jazz Fest to Mardi Gras and some of the real unique cultural activities. One thing I also do just want to reiterate that, there are a lot of people from Darren and Shara's experiences there the year before, really wanting to have a continual giving back scenario. Mine was a personal nature. My family's from New Orleans. We came here as immigrants, and it was my ability to really give back to a city that has given a lot to me, and everyone else sort of had their own motivations for going down. So it was a fantastic experience, I think, that all of us could really relate to. And as we go forward, I guess Darren's going to talk a little bit more about the Idea Village we worked with.
Thank you, Jeff.
You got it.
All right, I'm going to talk a little about Idea Village. Idea Village is a nonprofit 501c3 that's focused on raising resources to allocate and build capacity to help entrepreneurs become stronger after the hurricane. There were a number of entrepreneurs, roughly about 22, 23 that we worked with. We sat down, kind of Idea Village set up meetings before we got down there and scheduled meetings with us and them for about 2-hour blocks of time. The entrepreneurs, we sat down and kind of interviewed them about their immediate needs and ways that we might be able, and kind of brainstorm ways that we might be able to think of really quick kind of like wins of how we could address those needs. Some of those needs, and the example that we use a lot of the time is there was a little cafe who had a really charming little cafe on Oak Street, and we went in and met with the owners. And who was on that team to know what the Oak Street did? Okay, all right. These fine folks met with the Oak Street crew and noticed that the one of their like main selling points was a little review that was in the bathroom of the restaurant that touted how this cafe had fabulous food by many local magazines, and then they recommended that they bring that to like the front window. So there are a couple little things like that we worked on with many different businesses that were things that really, if entrepreneurs are just kind of going 110% focused on their mission, that they don't pick up on a daily basis. So our deliverables were kind of 1 to 2 page strategy documents that the organization that we worked with, Ideal Village, kind of promised to follow up on and evaluate the matrix over the next couple of months to see how successful those suggestions were. Other recommendations that we made were not business specific, but corridor specific. So part of Idea Village's strategy is to focus on clusters of entrepreneurs and maybe 10 or 15 businesses that are close to each other, and think about ways that you can brand a neighborhood so that they might be able to become pockets of renewal for the city. So another suggestion that we had was to increase the signage on streets, or maybe even put up banners or do street parties that would add value to the 15 or 20 businesses on one particular block. We also Idea Village put up $25,000 and asked us to match the $25,000, and an alum came to the table and matched the $25,000. And we used that money and pretty much almost killed each other trying to figure out which businesses of the 22 businesses that we worked with would end up getting that. So that's a little bit about Idea Village. That's a little bit about our project, and I will pass it off to whoever. To Sarah, who is next.
Okay.
I'm sure you might have some questions.
Pictures in here. Okay, so I'm going to talk about just a couple of the businesses that we worked with. We're going to do one from each team. So this is Norma. I'm wearing her T-shirt. She's the queen of the ball, snowballs. Have you guys had snowballs? Maybe not. It looks like a snow cone, but it's actually significantly different. We learned a lot about the manufacturing process. So it's done in this like old school machine that you grate the snow into these little teeny ice shavings. And it's actually really kind of creamy and yummy. You put like milk and fruit in it. You stuff them. They're really quite tasty. So Norma, as you can see, has a kind of amazing business sense, as evidenced by her interior decorating. She's got a ton of personality. She's amazing. She's really fun. We had a great time with her. So we went in and kind of said, okay, how can we look at this business as maybe a catalyst for the street? Because she's about a block off the main street, so you can kind of see her awning from the main thoroughfare. And we felt like her business really had the potential to be a business that would draw more foot traffic to the street, which is something that they're really struggling with on Oak Street. So we went in, talked to Norma, sat down with her for about an hour, ate some snowballs, talked about her business, and she actually has a pretty good sense of kind of what products are most profitable for her, that kind of thing. She has no sense of how to market, like what's the best way for her to get the word out about her store. And obviously, if you come to the store, it sells itself. So the challenge is really getting people there. So we made some pretty simple recommendations that were actually pretty low cost. Things like putting a little postcard together that's actually really cheap, and she leaves it at the local hotels, and they get people there. Or putting stuff on like the street fair signs. It's a really big deal to have street fairs around New Orleans. Everybody likes to party. So making sure they get on those advertisements, getting a website. So I think she's getting NOLA Queen of the Ball, I think is her new website. Will be up soon. Things like that. And she's got a lot of really great people who can help her. Her husband is a football coach at the local high school, so he's got all these great students who are like in need of summer jobs. So that was the first thing we did for her, was really marketing outreach. And then the next thing we did, and this was kind of the, again, low-hanging fruit from the perspective of a business school student, but really made a difference to her, was give her some grant money to increase the footage of her store. So she can't go either way in terms of expanding the physical space, but she can expand onto the sidewalk. So making sure that she has good seating out there, that she's got some heat lamps and stuff like that. So she's doing that now. Actually, Adam went back and saw her, and she's doing really well. And then she also is going to get another snowball machine, because the snowballs are great, but they're really slow. So it takes a long time to make a good snowball, so she's getting another one. But Norma's definitely someone, she's actually been in touch with us. She's a lot of fun to work with. And she's definitely somebody this business is going to probably be huge in not too long of a time.
How many snowballs does she
So
sell?
Norma's not open regular hours right now. She's open when you call her. So some days she sells a lot of snowballs, like there's a line. On other days she's not open so much. But so she fluctuates. She's working on regular hours through this website, because that will get more traffic in more regularly. And also she's the only employee right now. So she's going to get some part-time employees from the high school from her husband who will help her out. And she's also looking at doing a lot of private parties and stuff like that, which she's quite good at. She does a lot of catering. Yeah.
Does she live in her store?
She doesn't. She lives a block away from her store.
Okay.
So these are her kid seats that Adam looks so cute in. So she lives about a block away. Most of the entrepreneurs on this street either live above the store or less than a block away. She actually, one of the reasons she's so well known on the street is that the power went out when they had a tornado that came through a few months ago. And so rather than close up, which is what everybody else did, Norma went home and made her husband drag the generator from their house down to the store and sold coffee and snow cones out of the store. So she's definitely entrepreneurial in spirit. All right, Courtney.
So I actually don't have a picture from our team, which I apologize for. But what's that?
You can leave that.
Yeah, just keep thinking about look at snowballs and think about hair salons instead. Leah was on my team, and we had the great fortune of being on Bayou Road, which was another commercial corridor that Idea Village has already been kind of focusing on, and they've given some grants to small businesses there, and then they're looking around the street and saying, who else is there? Can we kind of build that cluster? And I want to tell you about Farron Smith, who is one of the most. So I came from a background where I worked a lot with social entrepreneurs, and I just have this love for individual entrepreneurs. And Farron was like a light out there. She was just really shining bright. She's like 6 feet tall, speaks a mile a minute, can't stop thinking of new ideas. She's working 3 jobs while she's doing this. Her family actually evacuated to Atlanta after Katrina, and her daughter stayed there. So her daughter kind of got settled in a new high school there, lives with her sister. But she came back with her son, and she one day we were talking to her a couple of different days. The first day when we first met with her, she was like, I'm kind of shaken up because, so sorry if I'm not focused, but my son goes to high school over by my house, and this morning on the radio I heard about this shooting at a McDonald's, and that's the McDonald's that he goes to every morning to get breakfast on the way to school. So she had a lot of stories to share about the storm, about how she and her friends and family had to recover from it and what they've done. And I think she was just a beacon for me and for our team of the kind of hopeful entrepreneur that's really going to bring a lot of energy and business back into New Orleans. So Farron's running this dance supply company, but then she's like, that's not enough. I want to open a hair salon too. And she's at Tulane, getting her marketing degree right now, and she's just like all over the place. It's awesome. She's got like a 4-hour-a-day job at FedEx from like 5 a.m. to 9 a.m. delivering packages so that she can get benefits and then have the rest of the day to launch this business and run the dance supply business. She interned at a radio station for her MBA with the express intent of like I can go back there and get good kind of press coverage later on. So now she like calls up the radio station like, hey, I have my grand opening coming up for the hair salon. Can you mention me? You know? So we met with her 1 month before her launch. She had kind of built out this retail space that was right next to a bunch of other small businesses that Idea Village had worked with. And she spent $4,000 total on the build out of this thing, like creating 4 different hair stations, creating the sinks in the back, the place where they sit in the front, all this stuff. She had like a sitting area that was benches that had been built out of 2x4s by some friend that she had. And when we saw her, she was thinking more about like the experience. So she's like, when they're waiting, I want to have good music playing, I want to have food, I want to have like this kind of feel like a community and stuff. So she was kind of all primed for launch. And then the business model, we spent a lot of time talking to her about. So basically, this awesome model is like a tenant model. So like she pays rent, and then she has these stations which are kind of individually rented by hairdressers, and they bring their own clientele, they manage their own appointments. All they have to do is pay her a check, which means that she doesn't have to get involved in all the systems of it. She just says, as long as you have enough clients to cover your own chair, then your chair covers the utilities, covers my rent, and everything else on top of that I clear. So it was pretty solid business model. And then she's pointed to these 4 stations, and she's like, so they'll do hair there and there and there and there. And then if I could just move like that staircase right there, I could have a 5th station, and that would be all profit. So we were able to give her this small grant. I mean, it cost like, was it $4,000? $2,500 to like move these stairs and then have kind of 1/5 station full of profit from there on out. So kind of easy wins on that front. I wanted to talk a little bit about collaboration and community. So Idea Village wasn't just interested in like who are the big bang individual businesses out there. So as Sarah kind of alluded to, we were kind of looking at like which of these entrepreneurs are really going to build the overall street and build the overall cluster. And I think Farron kind of fit with that too. So she was really kind of diplomatic about going up to the other hair salon 2 doors down and talking about how they're really clearly segmented from each other and would serve totally different clientele. Was really energetic about making connections with all the other people on the street, all the other merchants, and helping put on a little street fair for Jazz Fest and stuff. So that was pretty important for us too. So we gave her the grant to move the stairs. We gave her some recommendations on kind of separating the businesses. So right now the sign on the front literally says like sister-in-law's hair salon and dance supply. So we like talked a little bit about like mixing these businesses, and she was already worried about it. Spent some good time brainstorming with her about that. And mainly walked away. I think one of the biggest things was she, as the profile of an entrepreneur, is somebody that Idea Village can really get behind, talk about. It's a great story for them and a great person that can contribute a lot to their portfolio. So I think actually one of the biggest things was just kind of elevating her in their minds and making her really part of the Idea Village family and portfolio of entrepreneurs. So that was our work on Bayou Road. And Ash, what are you doing?
So the guy I want to talk about, unfortunately, I didn't put his picture up here, but he was quite different from most of the entrepreneurs we met, because most of the people we met, there was a lot of opportunity to kind of discuss simple things with him. But this guy, I just quickly find him. There he is. His name is Vincent Pina. He's pretty smug over here because he's just got the check which we gave him, but that's not the interesting part of the story. So, well, that was for him in some sense. So we walk into this guy, and there's this big burly guy who comes down gruffly and sits across us, and he's like, and his attitude was more or less, so what are you business school students going to talk to me about? But that's the impression which we got when we met him the first time. And we were like, oh no, here comes another guy, we kind of got to prove ourselves to. But what was amazing about this guy, he was the only entrepreneur we walked in and we met. He came with a calculator, and he had his books for the last 3 months, because he was just open for 3 months. He knew everything about his business. You think we know stuff about COGS and how inflation and all is working in? This man could tell you how much the cream cost in his store and how he could bring down the prices. So his story is quite interesting. He has been to his benefit in the food and beverage retailing business for a long time, And then in 2001, he was in a trade show in New York, and he saw some gelato machines. He said, this is the future because gelato is low fat. This is going to come to the US. So he says, this is coming. I need to get into this business. So what does he do? He's in Wisconsin or someplace like that. Sorry. And he just decides within a year. Sorry, Adam. So what this guy essentially does is within a year, he sells his house there, moves down to New Orleans because his wife's family is from there, and orders machines from Italy, has his whole store fitted out in Italy, and has it exported, and gets himself in the French Quarter district 18 months from concept to completion. Does great business, revenue $35,000 a month. This guy is making in revenues. And then 6 months later, Katrina happens. So this guy is messed up. Like he showed us when he came back to his store, one of the things he showed us was to show the amount of desperation. He had these plastic lemons in his store, and you could see that people had bitten into it when they had kind of looted the shops. So, I mean, that was the level of desperation people must have had over there. But when they looted the shops, they were trying to bite into plastic lemons, of course not realizing that they were made of plastic. So anywho, once after Katrina, he came back pretty soon. The bottom line was he could not afford to pay the rent in the French Quarter district. So he moved down and to a different neighborhood. And the bottom line is, you see this guy, his place is called Gelato Pazzo, which means crazy ice cream in Italian. This guy's vision is not to start 3 or 4 stores. He wants to go regional, like he wants to have a franchise chain. And I think what really helps him is the background he's coming from, being in the retailing business, etc. Everything he's thinking of in terms of scalability. Is this concept scalable? Be it production, like it was quite interesting. I mean, we tried to broach the retailing model with him. We said, why don't you go into the Whole Foods equivalent and try to sell it stuff? This guy says, wait a second, do I have enough quality control, etc. So this guy was like thinking through everything, which we guys learned through in class. So we did work with him quite a bit. We caught a lot of very obvious things in his store, which would like help him improve. For example, he had these great flat screen TVs, but they were never on. He had the frontage of his store, it just looked like it was closed, because the blinds. What happened was the way his store was, the sunlight would come in and melt his ice cream. So the only quick solution he had was to put blinds. But when he put blinds on, it looked like the store was closed. So we gave him money to actually put an awning outside and stuff like that. So anyway, and then the final thing which we discussed with him was we introduced him to the private equity guy who's probably going to have a chat with him about actually investing and seeing if this concept now becomes scalable. So now I'm going to hand over to Adam, because what was great is you've heard all our stories, and we all are very passionate about our entrepreneurs. And even though we said we're going to be impassionate about it, when it came to allocating the $50,000, there was a lot of emotions, and Adam handled it very well.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you a quick little story about the money. Ash wanted to give this guy $40,000, 80% of our budget. I think I said, trademark the slogan? So we clearly had some disagreement, and in the end we found a good compromise, which was to fund the awning so people could actually see into the store and take the blinds down. I think it was a couple thousand, and we actually partnered. One of the ideas behind the awning was it was something we did to the Oak Street Cafe that we mentioned on the street, and also the Snowball Shop, because it just improved the street image overall. Half the stores on the street are closed. People don't view it as safe. We talked a little bit about Norma having irregular hours. A lot of that is because of her personal safety and when she can be open. She's open right now, kind of after school, where she hires high school students to sit in the shop, or her husband's there because she cannot. She'll go there during the day, but it's not necessarily viewed as safe for her to be working in the store alone during the day. But so we all, fell in love with different, entrepreneurs, and I just want to point out, I'm not going to make that big. This chair did not break, just for the record. So there's no grant money for a new chair. And so it was tough because everybody, we divided in, 5 teams of 3, and each group of 3 met with 5 different businesses. And people, you could see Ash's attachment, you could see Courtney's attachment, you could see Sarah's attachment to the businesses we met with. We then had to come together and to discuss 25 different businesses, and decide who we were going to fund, and also, how we were going to have the most impact with the dollars, and that everyone had seen, each business, and also because the timing was so compressed, where we were meeting with these people and we're trying to give them good strategic advice and make sure that the value of the time they spent with us, even if they weren't getting money or they were getting money, was valid. We didn't have much time to go through the process of allocating, the money, and I think people had different ideas, different things that mattered to them, whether it was the impact on the street, whether it was, this person, just, had these hurdles, and maybe this business had more, revenue right now, and so it was more capitalized. So it was a very difficult process of going through in a short amount of time and allocating the money and being good fiduciaries. So I know personally, and I think some other people would agree that classes at the GSB, negotiations. I know our team kind of strategized when early on people were saying, what are we going to give money to? And we started hearing numbers. We, I don't know if everybody knows this, we kind of inflated some of our numbers, and we included, a business that we knew we weren't going to fund, but so we had something to trade away. And, so it was, that was all Sarah's idea. But I mean, the point was, you could actually see, how, some of the classes that came, you went through and impacted, the experience, and you could utilize that. And I think I said too much based on it. But, overall, I think it was a great process. I think, you could really see the best of the GSB. I know, several people, I think all the teams were still working at 2, 3 a.m. the night before, working on our proposals. I know Nishant, we split up, sent me one at 5 a.m. that he had written up. And, working on the proposals and kind of putting together the backup data before we had, kind of our morning meeting to decide how we were going to spend the money. And, our team had, gone through item by item and priced out what different things we recommended with costs and kind of why we thought it was good for both the community and the entrepreneur. So that's the story on the funding. Yeah.
How did you consider loans versus grants, or was it just?
No, it was part of the idea was New Orleans has a lot of money that's been allocated but not distributed, and it was let's get the money in people's hands. Part of the agreement though was something called pay it forward, where if this money made a big impact on them, they would find a way to repay it. So for example, the Oak Street Cafe, which we gave some money to kind of clean up their storefront, they bought new umbrellas and chairs outside. We had specifically told him we believe in this concept to pay it forward. And me being Brad, the owner, used to own a snowball shop, and we said, look, you still have that sign on your snowball shop next door to Queen of the Ball. She reopened next door to the one that was closed post the hurricane. It still looked like there was a closed snowball shop. They were like, take your sign down, donate the sign on the building to her. You don't need it anymore. And now when I went back over and saw her over when I was down for Jazz Fest, she hinted at how he still has the snowball machine. He's trying to sell it for $900, which is what he paid for. He's not depreciating it or not cutting her deal. And so we were able to go back to like, hey, we gave you $4,000 and twist the arm a little to get that to stop collecting dust. So.
Also, the money that we were allocating, so part of it came from an anonymous Stanford donor, part of it came from Idea Village. A big chunk of the Idea Village allocation was actually from a pay it forward from a business entrepreneur that they'd invested in 2 years ago, whose business has taken off, and he's now kind of like leaving the Idea Village umbrella to go forth on his own, and he gave a big chunk of cash to that pot.
So after we spent a week working on the ground with these entrepreneurs in different neighborhoods around the city, we had an opportunity to take a step back and meet with some of the leaders at different levels, much thanks to Jeff's pretty fantastic connections. And two of the more prominent leaders we met with were Ray Nagin, who is the fairly well-known mayor of New Orleans, sort of known for his handling or mishandling of the post-Katrina situation, depending on your perspective. And also Mitch Landrieu, who's currently the lieutenant governor of Louisiana, but also ran for mayor against Nagin in the wake of the hurricane. So it was sort of an interesting dynamic. We probably all had different perspectives on the meetings, and this is sort of just my personal impression, so feel free others to jump in or defer. So we met with Nagin after we met with all these entrepreneurs who had lots of energy and hope, and he walked into the room and he sat down and he sort of said, okay, well, tell me what you've seen, and he answered our questions, but a lot of it was referring, we sort of pushed him on things. He said, oh, well, there's not a lot of money, or there's bureaucracy, or there's other levels at which this isn't, things aren't getting done, and sort of pushing off on other things, which I think to some extent was true, but I felt a personal frustration was sort of, he was, sort of, it's other people's, it's the fault of others why things aren't happening. And so I wanted to see more of this spark of energy, I'm the mayor of the city, we're going to rebuild, it's going to be great. And I didn't really get that from him. I think what was interesting about the meetings with the contrast with Landrew, who we met with the next day, who walked into the room, didn't stop moving the entire time. He was dynamic, he was energetic, he pushed back on things we said, he had lots of questions for us, and I felt really that there was a lot of hope and energy there. So different politicians have different styles, but for me it was sort of, I felt that there was a lot of energy and hope, and felt a little bit like maybe things, it would have been interesting to see what had happened had Landrew been elected mayor, and sort of his different approach to dealing with the situation and his vision for the city. One other thing that was sort of interesting was we met with this man, Jay Lapierre, who is the head of the Business Council of New Orleans, and he talked about one of the primary goals of the Business Council was to bring businesses back to the city after the hurricane. How do you get people to come back? And one of the primary things, the concerns of businesses was that, is it safe to come back? How am I going to be assured that this isn't going to happen next year, that the levies are going to hold? And one of the big issues with the levies was that the levy boards, the bodies that oversee the levies and are responsible for doing the upkeep and checking for cracks, that kind of thing, they're fairly corrupt, and there's a lot of patronage, and sort of everybody knows they don't really, it's sort of a system where it's a lot of favors and that kind of thing. And so what they decided was that they really spearheaded this campaign to overhaul the levy board system. Let's, if we're gonna convince businesses to come back, that it's safe, that the levies are going to be kept up, we need to overhaul the system. And so the Business Council took out ads in the paper against candidates who were running for the levy boards that were sort of known to be corrupt, and they worked with state and local legislators, and they got legislation passed that overhauled this whole system, and really changed things. So that was sort of an interesting perspective on the way that business can be involved in politics. And I think that's it. I'm going to hand it back over to.
I was just going to add one story from Mitch Landrew. There was a story that he told that was basically, he was actually out in rescue boats a couple days after the storm, rescuing people and saving lives. And he was going around in a boat, and he got to this one woman and pulled her, an older woman, and pulled her onto the boat. And they were riding back to the rescue place, and he said, well, Miss Myrtle, you saw me in the mayor saying mandatory evacuation, everybody's gonna be underwater. This is the real thing, right? And she was like, yeah. And he was like, well, we told you to get out, right? And she was like, yeah. And he said, well, why didn't you leave? And he said, we don't trust none of y'all. Which just says so much about all the different factors that are playing in terms of trust that's broken between some people and the leadership, and why it's so hard to rebuild, and why it was so hard to leave, and all those different things.
And I think one of the things that was interesting is that we looked to the leaders, these politicians and business leaders, to really, rebuild and spearhead the redevelopment effort. But I think what I left with, what was most hopeful, was the entrepreneurs that we worked with, really people who were on the ground every day with their businesses trying to make it work. And that was what was really, that's what's really going to be the future of the city. So I'm going to hand over to Leah and John for some closing remarks.
We found some really interesting leads. This is one that Shara won as Florida was continuing to win lots of sports. So people were in the bars. What was it? Was it basketball? Okay. I don't know. Pick your sport. What's that? Hey, money this time. Nothing crazy. Nothing crazy. So, no, just recognizing that we want to leave a lot of time for questions. We're going to talk just about final impressions. And it was a really emotional trip. I don't think any of us had any clue about how emotional this trip was going to be. And it was for a number of different reasons. One is just working with 15 MBAs to try to get something done in a short period of time, where it's not just about grades, there's money involved. Like, you want to talk about study group drama, this was it to the nth degree. But through that stress and tension, I think we gained a lot of respect and we learned a lot about each other in ways that we never would have. We also just learned a lot, I think, about the importance of your state of mind. And that's true for all of the people who live in New Orleans and for all the volunteers who visit. I went through my journal before coming here to remember what I experienced. And some of the quotes that I wrote were, one was from a tour guide we had on the first full day. And he said that whatever it was that you believed deeply in, that got proved by the storm. So if you believed in whatever it was you believed about God, whatever, if you were against the government, if you had beliefs about racism in New Orleans, whatever it was, you could point to something and say, yep, I was right. And Mitch Landrieu actually said it in a different way on the last day. He was just saying it just depended on where you were standing. Because there were places that hardly saw water, and there were places that were, saw 9 to 12 feet of water. The other thing that I learned a lot about that I couldn't have gotten in any other way was about entrepreneurship. You come here and, a lot of people are working on startups and these things, and you just don't get a full appreciation of what it means to be the owner and to be what residual claimant means. This is a true definition of being a residual claimant when really what you have left is next to nothing. And just amazing to work on something that wasn't a case about GE and lots of subdivisions, but something on a really small level and understanding how everything really has to tie together. And so 2 more quotes. One that we heard from a lot of people in terms of what we should do is that we go tell the story. So that's obviously part of the BBL. And then one that I'm not really sure how to take came from Mayor Nagin, and he said, this is the biggest reality TV show ever. One of the reasons I was asked to speak is because I'm from the South. My mom was born and raised in Gulfport, Mississippi, which received a lot of damage in the storm. And I think also being an African American, what I noticed is what resonated with me was a little different than what resonated with other people. Like the hairstyle lady, she was doing chemical treatment, and the other person was doing natural. But I had to explain according why that means that there's no competition and hearing the music. So there were a lot of things that I noticed. I've never experienced African American things with non-African American people, and I hope Ash will probably comment a little more on that too. But it kind of helped me see there's some things I get in ways that are different from other people. And sometimes it was we had a meeting with Idea Village, and there was a cook who gave a quote, and I was like, oh, that's a church song, and he thought she just made it up or something. But it's just there were a lot of things that helped me get a broader sense of my identity. And the last thing that I want to share, just to be honest, is that I was somewhat embarrassed during my time on that trip because I wasn't very surprised, and I should have been. And as I watched Nishant and some people who were from other countries, and they were just kind of blown away by some of the examples of racism and some of the problems. And I noticed that I really wasn't that pinched, and that kind of showed me how far off my sense of how things go is. So I think that's probably the most lasting feeling for me as someone who's from the South and went there was I almost shrugged my shoulders sometimes, and that's kind of, hopefully Ash will have something to come from. John, anything you want to add?
John, I didn't really know I was going to be saying anything, I guess. So I think what I'll do is touch on something that I actually touched on with the group, and it's still the thing that resonates the most with me to this day. So around the time that the hurricanes hit New Orleans, I just remember feeling a really big sense of almost needing to be on the ground, right? Of almost needing to be there, and I felt it for a number of reasons. But I told the group, I actually felt a lot of it because I'm black, right? And I felt like this was a situation that was disproportionately impacting people like me, and they weren't getting the help that they needed, and they were being ignored. I know a lot of you guys probably saw Kanye West comments about Bush, and I felt very similar, right? I was just like, they're not getting the help they need, and somebody's got to do something about it. And so when it first hit, I personally sort of emptied my savings and sent my money down to New Orleans, and I remember just still feeling like it wasn't enough. I was down south visiting my grandparents and saw military convoys heading towards New Orleans, and just remember wanting badly to be on one of those convoys heading down there. And so, when the opportunity came to go on the trip, I was busy doing my first year MBA thing, right? My head was
stuck way far in my behind thinking about my studies, and I wasn't initially gonna go, and then Darren pulled me out. Darren pulled me out, and him reaching out to me sort of helped remind me of what was important to me. And so I went down there, and then I went down there. It was initially, it was kind of a black thing for me, right? Like I was down there, and I was like, okay, these are my people. They need help, and I really want to see, things change and things be different. And I wasn't really surprised, like Leah said, about some of the racism and some of the affected areas and whatnot. But the thing that I think...
Sorry to interrupt you. You talked about racism a couple of times. Can you give us an example of something that was really striking to some people in your group?
Sure. I
can think of a few that were actually shared by our tour guide who happened to be white. You mentioned a highway that was being built. I think it was just extending I-10, and whether or not it went into Chemay, which is a wealthy black neighborhood, or French Quarter, or some other place, and how it ended up being built right in the middle of this wealthy black neighborhood, and because people felt like it didn't matter as much. I think what we saw it bear itself out as, and excuse the food in my mouth. Sorry, was a difference in the weight of value when decisions are being made. And another one was a housing project, and what to do with these people who actually have a reasonable state of living, but because we want to be saviors, we're going to come in and give these people no place to live. And it was sort of a difference in the way decisions are made depending on who you're talking about, I think is what we saw it come out.
And so, I think to continue on, I think I kind of felt that way for a pretty, for maybe the first half of the trip. And I think the funny thing that resonated with me is I think it's a way a lot of people just walk around and feel, right? You just feel kind of close to the people who are kind of like you, and you feel that allegiance. And then we were up at 3 and 4 in the morning working on this project, and I realized that I wasn't thinking about it as a color issue, and neither was anyone else on the team, right? We were down there as people helping people who needed help, and that really moved me. That made me feel embarrassed kind of for the way that I had thought about it before. Not that I think that was wrong, but to think that I was potentially in some way in a unique position to feel a certain type of loss or a certain type of concern that other people couldn't feel. And I realized that just wasn't the case. And honestly, at the end of the trip, that just made me feel, and I still feel it to this day, just close in a special way with everybody who went, because they helped me see that it was about people and about people in need and people in trouble, and not just about black people in trouble and black people in need, and that that people of just all different backgrounds, people from different countries who might not have a reason to care about what was going on in New Orleans, cared very deeply about it. And that just made me feel really good, and that just made me feel that was kind of, if I had to pick a defining experience where I felt like I fit at the GSB, this was it. This was where I wasn't, black at the GSB. I was a student at the GSB, and we were all in it together. And so that's kind of one of the more powerful things about the trip for me. And I just, again, thank everybody who was on the trip for showing me that and for sharing that with me. And so it really was a special time, I think, maybe not just for me, but for everyone. And that was sort of how it impacted me personally.
We just throw it open for question and answers quickly.
Oh, Ash, I really wanted to hear it.
But there's just 2 points which I want to say. Of course. The first thing is, I'll be honest, I exemplify being I was surprised I got admitted to GSB, because when you look at all those qualifications, besides being low on the academic thing, the social stuff I hadn't done too much of. I've been involved in a bit of things, but my idea of doing social work is basically to write a check and feel good about it. I'll be very honest about it. But this was the first time when I actually got my hands involved in something, and there's 2 things which I realized. First thing is, even if you have money, it's not easy to give it away. We had $50,000. We really couldn't give it all away because of a combination of reasons. That really made us think that giving money is not good enough. You got to do something. So I'll atone and I'll do board fellows next year. The second thing is something which Rohit actually said, but I need to resonate. This is coming from the foreign student angle. A lot of us come to the US, we study over here, but every time it comes to thinking of donating money for charity or doing something, the first thing we do is write checks for Red Cross in Asia or something like that. This was actually possibly the first time we did something for the US community which was so involved. And it was a very unique experience for us because it made us realize that this country in some sense has given a lot to us. It's given us opportunity, it's given us an education, which is why we moved so far. And it felt good to kind of pay back to the society which we came from. And the final thing is the whole race issue, which I know got me bristled very, very often, and I'd rather not speak about some instances on camera, but I was surprised that I was more affected by it than John and Darren. And in fact, they had a more rational view to it than I did, which is kind of good because they kind of made me see the light also on some issues. But the thing which I'd like to close it with is I am a Brahmin in India, and if you know, there's this whole caste system in India. And when I was in India, if someone asked me about the caste system, I'd say it does not exist because I was at the top, and I chose to see what I saw. And then having moved outside, moved and lived outside India, I started being affected by racism in subtle ways sometimes, and sometimes more blatant. And that makes me go back and think back about the same behavior. So I guess the only takeaway is sometimes when you sit at the top of the pyramid, you don't see issues which actually do exist. So with that, I'll open that for question and answers.
tone when you guys are here, you're really energetic and so many things that were positive. So wanted to thank you for sort of seeing that because it was so. You knew I was gonna cry. I always do. It was so. I think we were depressed. I think that's a fair way to characterize how we came back last year. And so I just wanted to hear, maybe especially from Sharon and Darren, on that laundry list of depressing things maybe that we saw last year. We didn't get to work with entrepreneurs, but other than those amazing, hopeful people working down there, did you see movement on that laundry list of the racism, the fact that there are still no houses, that there's no power? I mean, what did the lower ninth ward look like now?
So yeah, the question was just in comparison to the trip that went down last year versus this year, how much change did we really see, and what was our impressions this year when looking back to our experience and how we felt when we returned to school last year. And I think in terms of physical progress, we spent a lot of times in areas where there are more people right now. Bio Road certainly was a little bit more desolate. But I think the biggest thing that at least I noticed was that the people that are there now are the people who really do have hope and really are optimistic. I think last year a lot of people were just still hanging around and not sure what to do and really looking to the people coming in to provide the support. And I remember a lot of what I felt that I gave back on the first trip was just sort of that sense of hope that the rest of the country hadn't forgotten about the people down there. Not that gutting a house was actually going to do all that much for the community at large, but just our presence there was, I think, what people needed at the time. I think coming back this year, the people that are still there are really in it for themselves. They're not, the outside help is certainly appreciated, but they're not relying on that. And the people that we were working with were really optimistic and really motivated, and were really the survivors. So I think that's sort of the sense of hope that we come back with now, is that there is this population of people there that are working, for themselves and for the city. And Darren might have.
And then also we met with Ronald Lewis, who is probably 10 blocks away from the house on Iguana Street that we gutted last year, which is still the same. I mean, nothing's changed since we gutted it last year. So the family they're still evaluating whether to come back or not. But Ronald Lewis moved back into his house and has been kind of like a champion for maybe 15 or other people on his block. They're the only people in the lower ninth ward, just about, that have a house that is livable, and has the appropriate resources to be able to do anything. We met with him, and he had one of the most. I think it was just a beautiful little museum in the back of his house that the University of Kansas had come and constructed, and he was kind of like a parader in the social aid and pleasure clubs. Down there that does the second line, kind of organizes the second line parades, which we're all participated in again this year, and was kind of a highlight of the trip. But a Social Aid and Pleasure Club is basically an organization that does combines brass bands and lots of pleasurable things with providing aid and like relief, and it has been in New Orleans throughout the last 100 years or so. But that was a really encouraging thing, 10 blocks away from where we were working last year. But it's a little tiny pocket within a vast desert of the Cape.
A lot of you talk about racism and how you felt about race, and I'm curious if you have thoughts on how we should and could be talking about issues of race here, especially given that we try to convey this image of being a big happy family and there's nothing wrong with any of us.
I don't know. I mean, like, I would say one thing that, to sort of answer your question in a unique way, I mean, you asked sort of what, given our perspectives about it, what we could be doing here. I think, and all of us are probably going to have very different views on what could be done. One of the shocking things that I think in my life I'd never experienced before is the number of people just openly talking about it, just in a very candid, not, I mean, in somewhat ways very emotional, but also just a very candid, listen, this is what has happened in the past. This is what has been going on recently. Going forward, this is what needs to happen. And I've never heard, especially major politicians, openly discussing these things in a very realistic, sort of solutions-minded or looking for solution scenarios. That's never happened in my life before. Part of that maybe being white, part of that maybe being coming from a family in the South. I don't know. But I think one thing I took away from this is just the way, in my opinion, to start and to alleviate sort of misconceptions or concerns or misexperiences is just to start talking about it and to have open, candid conversations about it to where people are comfortable discussing solutions or discussing issues. So, I don't know. That was, I think, to your point, people, it's this topic that no one wants to touch because they don't know what kind of reaction they're going to get. And I think that's the way we're sort of brought up in many ways, shape, and forms. But I don't know. That was my perception of it.
I was wondering specifically, how do you get from that comfort and anxiety to open dialogue?
You find someone that you trust and you start talking. I mean, I would say that's one way I could think of doing it. I mean, anyone else have?
So one thing that was really powerful for me was going out to lunch with our entrepreneur that you've heard a lot about, Farron. And I was really struck by how comfortable everybody I met with was with, like, our little 3-person team coming in, Leah, like me with my blonde hair, and Rohit. And I felt a lot of invitation and welcome from that. And I think what really helped was going into these entrepreneurs' lives. So we kind of like went to lunch at the place that she loves to go to lunch to, and like chatted it up with people that would stop by our table and talk. And I think it's a different thing to have a conversation in a forum on race here, like in this classroom, as to like go out into a community where like a lot of that is really real, and maybe not to have to go all the way to New Orleans to have that conversation, but to take advantage of opportunities to kind of connect in the community here. So I think that's something that we can do that like brings it up to life in a very real way.
I guess we have one final point and then we are done.
Try and make this quick. I think the things that both Courtney and Jeff have said are great. And I know Jeff and I actually had some of those conversations, which I thought were fantastic. I will tell you this. I think that there are a couple of things that we can do at the GSB. I don't know the exact forum to do them in, but I mean, one way you create an environment where you can learn about other people is through positive shared experiences. So, just taking the time to find ways to do things with your classmates that are different from you and on an individual level. I definitely think there's room to do it on a corporate level, and I think some of that they're starting to try and figure out with like the Hall of Understanding and things of that nature. But maybe we just need to be more overt and blunt about it and have a forum about it, right? I mean, just find a way to to leverage the positive shared experiences into something deeper. And I also think, another thing that actually brought me a lot closer with like Ash and Rohit is like the fact that the questions were like when Ash would ask me something about what I was experiencing, it was like, hey, look, I don't know how else to say this, but I'm just going to say it. And he'd just throw it out there. And like I'm extremely comfortable with that. And actually that made it more comfortable for me to talk. I think oftentimes the dialogue breaks down because there's barriers of comfort and lack of comfort on both sides of whatever the dialogue is. And the moment somebody just throws it out there and says, hey, you know what? This may make me sound silly, but I'm just going to ask it anyway. And I want you to understand it's not coming from a place of malice. I think you'd be surprised at how open people are to talking about that. So we need to find ways to, I think, encourage that dialogue around the GSB, maybe in larger forums, maybe through finding some way to facilitate positive shared experiences, but also through just like asking the questions, right? Just and in a way where you're like, look, I have no idea about this, and I'm not going to be embarrassed about the fact that I don't know. I just don't know, and I'm just going to ask. And I think we had a lot of good conversations inside of the group doing that. So if we could find a way to make that mechanism broader, I think that's how you start.
Well, thank you everyone for coming, and if you have any questions, you can ask anyone later.